are listening to It's Later Than You Think.
What is going on, everyone? Today is Tuesday, January 7th. Our discussion today is around the courage to quit, knowing when to walk away, and clearing the path to happiness. Have you ever been in a situation where you get to a point and think, yeah, okay, fuck this? I'm sure we've all been there at some point. Maybe it was with a job you had. Maybe it was with a relationship you were in. Maybe it was in the first half mile of your 5K. What did you do next? Did you react in the moment and call it quits? Did you come up with a plan and try and get things back on track? Now, each situation I presented is completely different from one another, and there may be a variety of outcomes with those, but the point is still the same. Life presents challenges, and our decisions lead us to put ourselves in tricky situations. Perhaps that job we thought we'd enjoy ended up not being so great. Maybe the relationship wasn't working out anymore, and we didn't know how to fix it. Perhaps we should have trained for that 5K. There's a quote I want to share. Knowing when to walk away is wisdom. Being able to is courage. Walking away with your head held high is dignity. That quote, of course, by the late, great Unknown. In October of 2017, I had my, yeah, okay, fuck this moment. I was in the second month of teaching at a charter school, after 6 years teaching in public school. And my plan to get a renewed enthusiasm for the classroom was not going to plan. It was a month after my brother's wedding, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a glitch in the matrix. I really wasn't sure what else I should be looking forward to the rest of that calendar year. An abridged dating experience that stemmed from the wedding, which fell apart as quickly as it began, I had really gotten to an emotional dead end at that point and knew this isn't how I wanted things to go. I distinctly remember a couple of instances when I absolutely knew it was time for a change. The first being my daily commute, which at the time was a 40-minute drive on a highway that had miles of stoplights. Like a majority of people, when the light turns yellow, it's usually a split-second decision to see if we can give it a little more gas to get through the intersection. However, during my commute in the previous few weeks, I was realizing that as the lights would turn yellow, I would hit the brake and breathe a sigh of relief, knowing it was going to be an extra minute or two that I didn't have to be at work while I sat at the red light. That was pretty alarming for me. The second instance was going into the building in which I worked. This charter school was housed in an old city human services building. I would enter through the back door where the staff parked. The door to get into the building was thick and heavy, and it would slam shut behind you. One day I remember thinking, that sounds an awful lot like a cell door in a prison. A trip to the doctor and a diagnosis of, you've got work-related depression. And also, and you should quit your job, spun around in my head. As well as the $3,000 to break my teaching contract. And some minor guilt about leaving the kids hanging not even halfway through the year. Ultimately, I knew my mental health was more of a priority than the money. What happened over the next few months was the best thing that could have happened, given the situation. A friend of mine told me about an opening to bartend and deliver pizza at a local Italian restaurant. It ended up being exactly what I needed to get through the holidays and begin my search into the training development field at the beginning of 2018. By April of that year, I had started my new career and was so thankful for the 6 months I worked in the service industry. Not only was it a fun place to work, it was less stressful than teaching, and of course, I now had a newfound respect for the service industry. Eckhart Tolle once said, "Sometimes letting go is an act of far greater power than hanging on." Now I'd like to briefly go through some steps that we generally go through when things are getting tough and we have some decisions to make. These are some thoughts that we may have and how we try to process them. The first step being why we actually hold on to something that is giving us problems. Many times it could be the fear of the unknown. What would happen if I walked away? There's societal pressure. There's also guilt involved. You may feel bad about leaving the current situation. And again, that could be relationship, job, hobby that you have, etc. The comfort of familiarity versus the discomfort of change. That's a big one too, especially if you've been doing this or been in this situation for X amount of years. You may be worried about what things are going to be like outside of that. There's also the cost of staying. The emotional, physical, and mental toll of holding on to something that is bringing you down. Some examples could be burnout from a job that you absolutely hate, or even the emotional strain of a toxic relationship, or even a friendship that you've been holding on to. A lot of times, we tend to underestimate the price of staying stuck in a situation. Now, what we then can start to do is to get a shift in our perspective. If you can reframe your letting go of something as a positive action and not a failure, that can be a bonus. You can discuss with others or even journal to yourself or talk yourself through it how this is an act of self-care and empowerment. Some practical steps to letting go. Recognize when something is no longer serving you. You take steps like journaling, seeking support, such as therapy or talking to close friends or relatives, and also taking small actionable moves to get yourself in that right mindset. One thing it's important to remember too is the role of forgiveness in moving forward. Forgiving yourself as well as others. Giving yourself grace as well as others. Life is a learning experience, all lifelong. It's important to remember that. The last step I want to discuss is the rewards of release. Think about self-discovery, having a newfound freedom, and even unexpected opportunities that came your way. I also want you to think about some real-life experiences of others you know that have left a specific situation and things have improved for them. Now, I know it's not linear. It may not have improved right away, but in the long run, they're better off. Now, I take these steps and I think back to the situation I shared at the beginning of the podcast. I had to go through that whole list of why am I holding on? Why am I working at a job? And this was my whole kind of teaching career. I did teach 6 years, and after a few years, I knew this isn't exactly what I wanted to be doing for the rest of my life. But again, it was uncomfortable to think that I had gone to school and had plenty of student loans to pay off for a career I wasn't really going to be working in. So flash forward a few years later, and in the situation I described before, that was when I decided to start making some moves. The cost of staying, especially the last year or so of teaching, did put a lot of strain on my emotional, physical, and mental health. But at one point, I had to have a shift in perspective. I knew that letting go of that teaching job, of that career, was going to turn out okay. I didn't feel like a failure. I knew that it was a step in the right direction because I knew I could take my transferable skills from teaching and utilize those in a different career. I then took some steps to let go of that situation. It was a mix of journaling, talking with others, planning out what I wanted to do. And then eventually I got that reward of release. I was less stressed. I didn't have the anxiety. I started a new career in the corporate world, and it was all fantastic. So those are just some examples of what I went through. And I'm sure if you think back to either a situation you've been in before or maybe something you're currently in, go through those 5 points and see if you can get that to apply to your own situation. Now I'd like to go through a handful of real life examples, some things that could possibly happen in our own lives, and really tie that back into the overall theme of the podcast of that, life is short. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to enjoy the moments that we have. And if we're putting ourselves in stressful situations, it might be important to ask, am I really living my life the way I want it to go, that I envisioned it going? The first area I'd like to start off with is minimalism and letting go of material things. Now, while I don't know if complete 100% minimalism works for most people, I know for me it doesn't. But I would say I'm very good about not having clutter. I do not like clutter. I keep things fairly organized and simple. I really don't have much trouble letting go of those materialistic items. When's the last time you've decluttered your life? Whether that's of relationships or friends that you don't keep in touch with anymore, or even your closet or your dresser, basement, etc. What are some of these things that you no longer need? I know that most of us realize we hold on to things either out of a fear of letting go or out of nostalgia. But a lot of times it's just stuff that collects dust and sits in a box. I assure you, if you start to go through some of these things that you haven't looked at in months or years, even clothes you haven't worn the last 3 seasons, you will feel a sense of freedom, probably have less stress, and you might even feel some gratitude for the space and simplicity that you've now created. I highly recommend creating a list of things that you want to get organized in the next year. Start small like we talked about last week, in the next month, and start with one area, one item that you want to go through, and that's going to be a good place to start. The next area I'd like to discuss is releasing self-criticism. We are always our own worst self-critics. Part of that stems from perfectionism that lives sometimes deep down within us. We give ourselves these impossible standards to try to meet, when really we should be giving ourselves some more compassion. Releasing that self-criticism, that negative self-talk, will allow us to feel lighter, focus on the progress over perfection, and enjoy our life more fully. It's so important to be your own biggest supporter rather than your own biggest critic. Some tools you can use is journaling, writing out some self-affirmations, and even catching those times of negative self-talk. Give yourselves that grace we mentioned earlier. Another area, moving on from resentment or grudges. Letting go of this can help you feel lighter and open the door to new emotional connections. Think about the act of forgiveness as a gift that you're giving yourself. You don't have to hold grudges forever. Maybe you've lost touch with someone that you had a grudge against or with, and that you just can't see yourselves ever forgiving them. If you no longer talk to this person or have any relation to them whatsoever, why are you holding on to this grudge? It's something that crosses your mind every so often, and it gets you stressed out, gets your blood boiling. You're just wasting your own energy. The last area I will mention is letting go of an unfulfilled dream. I don't mean just giving up on your dreams, but maybe there's something that you had always wanted to do, but as the New Year's approaches, you realize that maybe that dream no longer aligns with who you've become. Like a career path that you once pursued out of obligation rather than passion. It's important, especially at the beginning of every year, to reassess our goals and allow ourselves to evolve. You can grieve the loss of maybe that unfulfilled dream, but you can find joy in rediscovering new dreams that reflect your true desires. Life is shorter than we think. Don't spend it holding on to what holds you back. Thank you again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.